world. Thank you for joining us today. Today we're going to be talking about Cybersecurity 101 for MSPs, helping you navigate the mayhem that is cybersecurity world. So we want to effectively help you with your journey, whether you're starting out or sort of in between your journey and trying to fill in some blanks. There's a lot of content today, so bear with us. We will try to reserve some time for Q&A at the end. If you do have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. And we'll either moderate on there or we'll try to answer them live where possible. So if you do have any questions, feel free to use either the Q&A or the chat field in the Teams meeting, and we'll kick things off now. We've got a jam-packed agenda, but I want to start with obviously cybersecurity is like an onion. There are many layers. But at some point, you will probably cry. So, hopefully after today's session, we'll make those tears a bit less. Part of the challenge is understanding and navigating, all the sort of misinformation and the confusion that is in the space within cybersecurity. The agenda today, we're going to kick off with some introductions, but then we're going to cover off things like, what frameworks you should be using. There are multiple frameworks out there. Want to sort of, align with specific concepts across the cybersecurity world, whether that's things like EDR, MFA, backup, all of the type of things that you're probably doing today, and sort of give you an idea on what you should be prioritizing on. And then we're going to cover off a little bit on how you can use some of those concepts with Microsoft, with the tools you have today, right? And then show you what Pax8 are doing to sort of help you on that journey as well. So I want to kick things off and, do a quick introduction about myself. I'm Elliot Seeto. I'm one of the security solutions consultants here at Pax8. I'm based in Sydney. My main goal, my main role is to support you, the MSP, on that journey, as I mentioned before. So if you are starting it out, these are things that we can support you and make sure that you're following certain best practices. We want to make sure that you're in the right frame of mind and leveraging what is out there in the market, and hopefully distilling down what can be quite confusing as well. I want to sort of hand it over to Aidan, who's the man with the longest title in the world, to do a bit of an introduction for himself.
Thanks, Elliot. Yeah, no, I could definitely do some work to make it a bit more concise, but g'day everyone. Thanks for joining. My name's Aidan Clifford. I'm the Microsoft Modern Workplace and Security Business Manager here at Pax8. So part of the newly established Microsoft team that we have here across the three clouds, basically M365, Azure and Dynamics. Our main role here is to make sure that you get the most out of your investment in Microsoft. So that being from a sales and marketing perspective or a technical perspective, or even just trying to cut through the noise when it comes to your Microsoft partnership and how you can get the best value out of that as well. So yeah, I'll dive into that content a little bit later, but back to you, Elliot.
Thanks. Appreciate you joining me today for this session. So why should we use a framework? This is an important step in anyone who's looking at getting on this journey or trying to follow and find out what they should be doing or what they need to do as part of cybersecurity. The key reason is to not shoot from the hip, right? Not putting in that guesswork, to effectively follow a predefined best practices that has already been designed by others in the world. There are a number of them out there that you can follow, but this is to give you that guidance that a lot of partners I speak to generally try to sort of work this out for themselves and sort of just put in the guesswork and maybe follow what clients are telling them they want or need, rather than actually put in a sort of prescriptive steps that can be undertaken through some sort of framework. The common frameworks that we're seeing a lot today, things like the ASD Essential 8, that is from predominantly for Australian partners, but there are a few New Zealand partners using this as a guideline as well. And we'll cover a lot of these in a bit more detail in a moment. NIST cybersecurity, that has been common for years now. It is very specific to the US federal government, but has a lot of applications that we can use for building out our security solutions and strategies as well. CIS control, while it's been around for a while, is fairly new, at least to the region, in terms of framework that people can start to use and adopt. And of course, things like ISO 27001, which a lot of partners are using as part of their strategy moving forward. Now, as we sort of break these down, the essential eight, when we sort of go through and understand which we should use, well, there is not one specific one that you should use. It may come down to your specific needs, your verticals, the industries you're working in, and your specific requirements and resource capabilities at the time. But for mine, there is probably a space for every single one of these to be used in some degree. So we want to sort of break these down. So when we look at the essential eight, at least for Australian partners and potentially New Zealand ones, it's a great tool for sales and marketing because it has been promoted heavily for, through the Australian government, through the ACSC and the ASD. So with that, it is a fairly basic baseline, right? So it can sort of set you up to start to open those conversations. And there's obviously a recommendation around compliance through the government. And it's said if you can sort of meet these standards, there is a potentially of 85% risk mitigation just in that as well. But it's a great tool just to open those discussions with your clients. How a NIST applies, right? Well, this is a way where you can use NIST to sort of understand the concepts around the life cycle of cybersecurity and what components fit where. It really sort of highlights the importance of the review. As you can see, this is designed to be a circle, and it's that flow where it constantly goes through and you identify, protect, detect, respond, and then you start again from scratch, where you're constantly reviewing and understanding what works, what doesn't, and improving your operations in the back end. It's a way to help you have those conversations with clients to understand why new tools and new functions, new processes need to be added over time, because it's that constant renewal process that you're looking at, that review and improvement. But it also helps to understand and build out your incident response plans. If you haven't already done so, this is a great way to understand whether you're meeting those key 5 sort of pillars of what NIST cybersecurity is. The CIS controls, particularly version 8, which is the most recent one, is one that is becoming something that we speak a lot more about it here at Pax8. And it is a great operational framework, particularly for technology businesses who want to run and understand how to build out their operational organization internally and apply this to not just themselves, but also from a client perspective as well. It is a very pragmatic and prescriptive way. It is designed to basically go in that specific order. There's 18 controls in there. You would start at 1, 2, and then follow 1 from 3 down to 18 as part of that as well. It helps to also sort of find gaps and prioritize what you need in your stack as you start to build them out as well, and understand where the risk mitigations can be applied accordingly as you sort of go through that framework. There are also maturity levels as part of that, which they call implementation groups, which I'll cover off in a moment. And the last one, and not least, is the ISO 27001. This is a great governing process and for procedures as well. Great to show you maturity levels, to help you sort of land those larger deals and to sort of open up new opportunities in the market that you haven't seen before, particularly with regulated verticals and even sort of local gov or state government agencies if you're looking at targeting those markets as well. It also helps to drive that value to the business because it says you're meeting it's almost like a certification that you're meeting some sort of standard, right, as defined by the ISOs 27001. It may also help you to future-proof for possible insurance requirements because this is the potentially something that they're going to introduce as part of a policy requirement through insurance, who are really driving that change in the market. As I mentioned before, it's going to potentially open up new opportunities, but it's also a way to help you identify and protect your own house, right? In combination with all the other frameworks out there as well. It is really focused on the people and process though. So it allows you to sort of maintain that operational control, understand where the gaps are within that people and process organization. But when we look at it, a collaborative approach that goes beyond those mandatory requirements. So whatever frameworks you use, there's always more that you can do, right? As I mentioned before, cybersecurity is like an onion. It does have layers. So the more layers you add, the better your resilience, particularly in the supply chain, which is becoming increasingly a high risk area. MSPs in particular are a big part of the supply chain for many organizations, SMBs out there. If you get hit, if you get breached, right, there is a potential overflow impact for all your clients as well, particularly if they get into your core systems like your RMM tools and your remote tools that effectively have access to all their back-end technology. So those are things that you want to make sure that you're doing the right thing internally as well. But expanding out on that, right, with the essential weight, as I mentioned before, it is a baseline. It actually comes from the ACSC's wider mitigation strategy, which is effectively 37 items long, right? And this graph here, it's kind of small. It's not meant for you to see. It's just meant to highlight that there is a lot more that could and should be done as part of security. The fundamental items effectively became those essential eight, right? Then I just and those are stuff that you can start to adopt. And again, it starts to open up that conversation. But something to note that a lot of things that we would generally consider foundational, fundamental items today, things like security awareness training, endpoint security, even things like email and DNS security, they aren't considered foundational, right? In many cases, they're not considered until sort of the top layer of security controls, according to the ACSC. So I believe that these are things that we can start to add in, right, over time to start to reduce our risk across the board. The essential eight is a great starting point, but again, there is a lot more we could and should be doing as part of this. With the CIS controls, if you're going to ask me which one I would recommend using, I'm probably a little bit biased because I do teach a course on this, but CIS controls version 8, as I mentioned before, is very prescriptive. Again, it's designed to move in that sort of order to help you prioritize what you're missing, identify potential gaps in your market. And it does in a way where it sort of breaks it down into sort of basic, fundamental, and organizational type items as well, right? Because it's not just about leveraging a tool; it's also about building out your process in the back end and make sure you've got the operations teams working within this subset of controls as well. So we sort of break it down and sort of use a medieval castle as an example of how this might work. When we look at the basic functions, right, these are distilled down into the key components that sort of set up our defenses as part of cybersecurity. From a castle perspective, that's your gatehouse defenses and your wall and watchtowers as part of that. Then you move into the foundational piece, which is your defense and attack procedures, right? Your counter defense type stuff, your archery and projectiles, your drawbridge and moat monitoring, and your hound husbandry, and they all have correlations with some of the 18 controls that you see on screen. And then the last thing is the organizational, and this is the operational part of things, the incident response plans and playbooks that you might build out. So your smithy operations, your drills and melees, and all of that type of stuff, which gets you set up and prepared for if an attack should happen. So that's how it's easy to break down, and these are stuff that you can apply today, and it's a great way for you to start building that out. But as I mentioned before, there are implementation groups, and these are effectively your maturity levels as part of this, and these do have applications across the board. Most MSPs probably should be looking at things like the IG1, which is all your basic sort of cyber hygiene, right? And that goes through that minimum standard. And this has obviously been designed for the enterprise, but it applies very well to what a lot of MSPs should be doing in the SMB space as part of that. So this is to sort of thwart those bare minimum or bare essential sort of cybersecurity elements through those general and non-target attacks. And then it sort of goes up and adds those additional sort of sub-controls within those 18 controls you saw before through the IG2s and the IG3s as well. And they start to sort of build up. So you can sort of build this out for, if you're looking to sort of attach yourself to higher quality value clients or largest risk averse clients like government and specific types of verticals, this is where you can start applying to it. I know of a couple partners that have looked at this and have basically adopted the IG2 as their own standard. So this can sort of inform you of what you need to do. And as part of that prescriptive element, these subcontrols are basically guidance on what processes you need, and even sort of spells out, if you're looking for tools to sort of meet a particular standard, spells out what that tool should actually have. So it's a great way to move forward. There is a QR code on screen. If you are leveraging the Essential 8 today, CIS, NIST, a lot of these frameworks all sort of have a you know, correlation between them. There's a lot of comparative items that sort of can be leveraged across the board. So there is a CIS to Essential 8 mapping that CIS has done. That QR code will get you there. And this will be available on the recording after the fact, so you can obviously grab that if you missed it as I move on through this. So when we look at how a lot of this is changing and what's been dictated, well, there's a lot of elements that's causing change, and that's things like technology, that is things like government legislation and regulation. But one of the key drivers is actually cybersecurity insurance, and this is an example of a partner who's gone through a update of their insurance policy from the last financial years. This is an Australian partner, so we work in the financial year of June, July. But effectively, as of the last financial year, right, their premium was about 22,000. The limit was about 5 million, and the deductible was 100,000 as part of that. As part of their renewal, well, that increased by 470%, right? So that went up to $105,000 for their premium. And their limit was actually reduced by half, so 2.5 million as part of their claimable amount, or the claimable limit. Deductible sort of stayed the same. There was no change there. But that has a massive impact. And what they're doing is not just increasing pricing, and we're seeing this across the board, but a lot of insurance policies are also conducting audits as part of this as well. So they're going through and basically saying, all right, do you have these minimum standards? If not, your premium is going to increase. If you can sort of check these boxes off, we'll reduce your premium a little bit, but it is still gone up year over year. So it won't get down to that 22,000 mark. In most cases, it won't. But there's some key elements in here that I sort of want to spell out, that it's looking for things like EDR as a standard now, rather than just AV. It's looking for things like phishing and security awareness training being conducted as a standard process as well. Also things like SIM, right, or security information and events management. And this is purely for auditing perspective, to allow you to effectively understand what may have occurred as part of a breach or an attack. All right. MFA is becoming a standard across the board. And then a business continuity plan, right? If you've got a backup, great. But unless you've got a plan to understand how you're going to recover, well, that's a missing element. And that's something that they're identifying now. So insurance is a big driver. So if many of you haven't seen this, well, when it comes time to renewing your policy, you may want to start to get prepared, because you probably experience this, and you probably experience the audits as part of that. And that is across Australia, New Zealand, and we've got Asia partners on board as well. You probably see that across Asia, because none of the insurance companies want to pay out, right, if they can avoid it. So they're getting harder in terms of their policies and what you should and could be doing as part of your security hygiene. All right. So we want to go through and help you weed through some of the noise out there. And these are common misconceptions. They're common confusing elements. And a lot of this has been driven through by potentially speaking to partners. A lot of it has been driven to them having sort of different perspectives and angles and descriptions on what they actually do and what these processes are. So I want to go through some of the basic ones that typically come up in my conversations I have with partners. And the most common one generally is around endpoint protection, right? What is the difference? What are all these new acronyms that are sort of popping out? So as we go through this from left to right, right, AV or antivirus software, that has been the standard for a long time. But antivirus software is effectively uses a database of known signatures, right, to detect computer viruses. That's the basic fundamental thing. That has no longer been as effective right, for a lot of the new items that have come out, things like virus malware and ransomware, which don't typically have a known signature to attach itself to. So that's where we saw the evolution into the next gen AV, which starts to add in those behavioral elements, right, to identify those non-signature based attacks. But then there was the inclusion of things like EDR, which is endpoint detect and response solutions, and they, on top of next gen AV, provide the additional response capabilities to that, right, beyond those kill and quarantine items, and provide sort of effectively advanced threat hunting as well, to be able to not just stop the threat, but also recover from an attack if something was to occur, and remediate those and bring that back to the pre-incident state. Right, so that leads into EPP, which sometimes is confused for endpoint protection, right, as an acronym, but it actually stands for endpoint protection platforms, which is effectively an evolution on the EDR space, which is combining EDR AV elements plus other items around the endpoint protection field. So things like identity management, vulnerability management, are basically a platform that you can condense down. So think things like Bitdefender and Acronis, which sort of attach a lot of security layers into a sort of single platform that you can utilize as part of that as well. And the last, but probably the newest one in the market, is the XDR, which effectively stands for Extended Detect and Response, which I'll cover in a little bit in the next slide. But these are effectively looking for threats beyond the endpoint, right, by collecting data from other security elements that you have in your stack, and effectively being able to correlate those events as well. But when we look at effectively a standard today, the standard is a combination of AV, next-gen AV, and EDR. That is your standard. As you saw in the cybersecurity insurance slide that we just showed you, insurance companies are requiring this as a minimum standard today. So if you're still using solutions that are effectively an AV or next-gen AV, right, this is where an EDR is going to become the item that you're looking for. And many of you are already talking to me and or looking at sort of expanding into those services to give you those additional capabilities anyway, which is great to see. So when we sort of expand on XDR, I need to sort of tier it back to first understanding what is SIM and what is a SOAR solution. So effectively, a SIM is a security information event management, and this is a system that's used for auditing purposes to collect, store, and report effectively log data. Right, this is ingested from other security sources and allows you to basically build out a plan of action and have that forensic element to effectively understand how things were done, so you can make a decision on what was actually done, right? What was breached? Was there an impact? Did they actually get into my data? So that's where the importance of SIM came into play. Then when we look at SOAR, which is generally something that allows that is used in conjunction with the SIM, is allow the orchestration and basic automation of those response capabilities, and allows you to effectively go through and standardize your operational tasks and your security tasks, so that you can automate a response based on a plan of action, based on a playbook that you might predefine to say, if I had a breach of a certain degree, automatically go and start ticking off these boxes, start remediating these functions as part of that. So this is where XDR comes into it, and XDR is effectively a combination of those two, combination of SIM and SOAR, right? It brings those two together to allow you the ability to ingest data into the XDR, right? That extended detect and response, to understand what happened, and then being able to build out that automation, right? So it's combining those two different platforms into a single platform to allow you to maintain the operational control, but be effective and provide that 24/7 service capabilities to respond to any security type of item out there, again using sort of automated response and playbooks and tasks and things like that. So how this sort of breaks down in terms of functionality, there's a table here that you can or reference, but the main components of it, XDR is basically doing the functions of both the SOAR and SIM. There may be a use case where you still need a SIM, right? Because there are limited long-term data retention for most XDRs out there. Generally, most XDRs are retaining logs for about 365 days a year, effectively. So if you need to retain logs for longer than that, that's where SIM or some sort of solution that holds on to that audit data for a bit longer may be required. From my perspective, XDR is still fairly new and immature to the market, particularly in the SMB space. It has predominantly been built out for the enterprise and been heavily used by the enterprise as a replacement for SIEM and SOAR. Part of the reason for that is the lack of APIs for a lot of the common vendors out in the SMB space, right? The vendors that you would use as MSPs. So until that becomes sort of feature parity across the board, XDR will be one of those things that it is limited limited to the APIs that are available through those vendors. But that is changing over time as more and more vendors are adopting this strategy, creating their open APIs to allow XDR providers to basically tap into that and not just have the ingestion capabilities like you would do with the SIEM, but also be able to automate those responses, which is where the API requirements come into play. Right. On the other side of that, the managed SOC services, and there are three different components here that you can look at, which is MDR. That continually is the most common one that you see out that vendors provide, that you see in the marketplace that is common term used. And MDR is probably the most functional, and that is basically providing threats, intelligence, and detection across endpoints, but as well as all other cloud infrastructure. And they commonly use things like SOAR, SIEM, or an XDR solution to sort of expand out to that, right? So they're looking at all of the services across your holistic security environment. Those MDR service providers generally use things like AI and machine learning to get a better, deeper understanding of what happened and how it happened, so we can make better decisions across the board to close up all those gaps. There is another category called managed EDR, and the managed EDR is effectively just similar to MDR, but primarily just focus on the endpoint, right? So they're a SOC service 24/7 generally that basically looks at just the endpoint and looks at making decisions across your workstation, servers, or anything that an EDR agent or an endpoint agent can go onto to effectively make decisions and sort of recover, remediate, and roll back items from that to a pre-incident state, right? And it's sort of it's not looking at the extended services beyond the endpoint itself. And the last service is the MSSP. And this is effectively a predecessor to the MDRs. And there's a few MSSPs out there. Those MSSPs generally just monitor network security events and allow you to sort of send alerts and anomalies when identified. But they're generally not that proactive when it comes to eliminating false positives or actively respond to security threats. So actually doing the remediation without someone actually stepping in and giving them approvals to do so. This has changed a little bit, and there are some MSPs out there that are a bit more proactive, but for the most part, they're effectively in there to provide guidance, but require you to effectively do the remediation yourself. They just provide a plan of action that you can undertake by providing some limited 24/7 capabilities. There is a one outlier out there, and this is one place I'm going to call out a vendor, Huntress, which is a great solution in itself. Probably is a combination. They call themselves a managed EDR, but I would call them maybe a combination of a managed EDR and MSSP, because while they do have great solutions and great services, their proactiveness is a little bit limited, and some of it comes down to you being able to click a button and approve some sort of provide them some sort of authority to actually start to remediate a function, but that is limited. They do have the ability, depending on the type of threat, well, they might actually go through and make some decisions like locking down a host, so that threat doesn't sort of carry over to other endpoints and other systems in the environment as well. So hopefully this sort of breaks it down and it gives you clear guidance on what these things are, because for me, there's a lot of confusion. Every single partner I speak to generally has a different concept because a vendor has told them something different, right? Or other vendors have sort of created confusion because they have a different classification on what these elements actually do. So moving on, one of the other things that sort of generally comes up is vulnerabilities, right? And vulnerabilities seems to be the biggest thing in the market. And there are a lot of examples out there. We'll now cover up a few of them in a sec. But all it takes is one single vulnerability for an attacker to take advantage of to do some damage, right? So this is things that we should be able to easily sort of clean up. But I want to sort of break it down and sort of help you identify, the difference between vulnerability management and pen testing, because I think a lot of clients in particular have misconception around what these are, and generally ask for a pen test when they're referring to a vulnerability assessment or management tool. Some partners have this confusion again, and some of that may be driven from a vendor perspective as well. So I want to sort of help sort of clean this up. So when we condense it down effectively from a baseline, vulnerability management and assessments is effectively helping you uncover vulnerabilities in the network, right? These are known vulnerabilities, things that typically the vendors, like your Microsoft environments, basically sort of highlight that they found a bug, as something that can be potentially leveraged, that we need to sort of close up those gaps. This may be across the network or endpoints, but they will also provide recommendations as to how to appropriately mitigate those actions and remediate that to reduce or completely remove that risk altogether, depending on the appropriate CVE or whatever the case may be. In contrast, pen testing involves identifying vulnerabilities in the network as well, much like vulnerability management, but it goes beyond that. It's looking to effectively hammer down the points and basically say, can I break this, right? I've exposed a potential vulnerability. Am I then able to sort of get into the network and do some damage, right? So the primary objective here is pen testing is to check whether a vulnerability really exists, right? And whether it's something I can leverage, right, as part of a breach attempt or attack as part of that. So to condense it down, I'm going to use a very basic analogy, and I encourage you to use this for your clients to sort of help them understand how this is, the difference between these two elements. And it's effectively using a door, right? So this is a door on screen, as you can see. A vulnerability management tool is intended to look at that door and say, all right, well, does that door have good hinges? Does that door have a lock, right? Yes or no. That is effectively what vulnerability management is doing. The pen testing solution is effectively looking at the door and says, all right, I see that it's got a lock, but am I able then to break that lock? Is it the appropriate lock to be used? Is it safe enough for me to make a decision to either have an attempt to sort of break it? Is it locked in the first place? So those are the things it's trying to do. And a pen testing is one of those things. If you look at things like the CI's controls as an example, as part of a framework, it is the last item there. It's control 18 of those 18 controls. And it's designed that way because there's all these things that you should be doing before you can even get to that pen testing state, right? So those are things that you should be monitoring and identifying and classifying with your clients. Some examples of vulnerability incidents out there, and these are common, these are the most recent ones, things like LastPass, right? This wasn't a breach, a vulnerability on LastPass itself, but a vulnerability on a Plex server that was used by a senior engineer was leveraged to basically gain access into the LastPass environment, right? So this is where it becomes important, right? Vulnerabilities, if we can check off those boxes, this is the low-hanging fruit that we should cover off. We should never have these type of incidents in the market. While it's very common, these are easy things that we can tick off and sort of remove as part of our security hygiene. Move It is one of the most recent ones, and that has massive impacts. And just lately, last week, they've had additional vulnerabilities there. As of June 15th, right, Progress discovered a vulnerability in Move IT, and this has led into a lot of organizations, particularly in the US, being breached. But I've seen things like New South Wales Health being exposed because they're using an older vulnerable, effectively version of Move It as part of that. So this is where data theft was leveraged. All of that information and names on the dark web were leaked to that data site. The most recent one, and something that amazes me still, is the Fortinet firewalls. As of July 3rd, so this is last week, 300,000 FortiGate firewalls are still left vulnerable through a patch that was released a month before that, right? And people still haven't gone through and updated it. I don't know what that looks like in the APAC world, Australia, New Zealand, and across Asia, right? Hopefully it's not as high, and this is predominantly elsewhere. But that amount is staggering, and that common CV is something that can be patched right now. And these are things that first we need to be able to identify, and that's why things like vulnerability management becomes important. Being able to go through and identify the gaps and then close those gaps as quickly as possible. So into sort of the last areas here is, companies spend millions of dollars looking at other services like firewalls. According to Kevin Mitnick, a lot of this is money wasted because the key weakness or key link within that security chain is generally the people, right? The people who use it, the administrator that operate the computer systems. So this is a big play where we need to start changing the culture. And that security culture comes down to starting with your own house. right? KPMG have this nice guide, this graph I've got up on screen that sort of goes through, and this is a continuous cycle that you should be looking at. Your security awareness training changes because the security requirements change over time. So we should need to be constantly making sure that not just our teams, but our clients are aware of the latest and greatest new threats out there and how to sort of counter them, how to identify them in the first place. If we can remove that and the users basically clicking on a link or doing something that they potentially shouldn't be doing, because they can easily identify, the better we're all for it, right? The less we got to rely on our preventative measures and our incident response measures. It is a big part of the gap that I see a lot of partners not doing at all or well, right? And it starts with creating a security awareness training program. And when I say program, I don't mean just throw a tool at it or sign up to one of the vendors out there. It is actually creating a program, right? Something that acts as that continuous improvement. But that's also going to help increase the value of what you're offering and then sort of promote you as that trusted advisor, but providing and leveraging this and making sure the teams are doing the right things and not sort of clicking on things and working with sort of the standard best practice and being able to identify all those risks as part of risk mitigation. Right. The last thing is MFA, 2FA, 2SV, right? What are they? How do they compare, right? A lot of you are using this as a standard now, but to just break it down, right? Two-step verification, 2SV, that is the basic verification step. And using this sort of this Venn diagram, it's effectively using these different factors. And the knowledge factors is effectively being used as part of that two-step verification. It is limited security. It's easy to be breached, right? If a threat actor really wants to get it through social engineering, these are stuff that that is no longer used as a best standard process. Two-factor authentication has become now the minimum standard, right? And this is for business applications and day-to-day use. And that uses two of these factors, your knowledge and particularly your possession factor, right? But it can be a combination of any of these two to get you to that 2FA. It is still considered MFA, but when I look at MFA in this particular realm, it is using three or more different factors as part of this. And this is where you should apply it to things like critical services and infrastructure where possible. And this adds the additional things like biometrics or being able to identify that you are who you say you are. But how do we sort of break it down and when do we use MFA compared to 2FA? Well, it's easy, right? From this perspective, it's just about identifying the risk, right? And this can be done from a value and risk-based matrix. So I encourage you to create a matrix like this and grab all your, do a business impact analysis across your environment, understand what is critical, what is the high value, high risk items. And that's where you make appropriate steps to add additional factors as part of that. So not just the knowledge factors, the possession factors, inherence factors, but you can add location and time factors into there. Whereas employee might have a particular schedule, so they won't never be signing in at a particular time. So you can put in those controls in place. So this obviously takes a bit longer, but this allows you to add those additional elements into it as well to help protect those critical services. All right. As I've said before, a lot of this, not just providing security services to your clients, but, look after yourself. Put your own oxygen mask on first. Make sure that you're protected in-house. So do that BIA, that business impact analysis on yourselves before your clients. Make sure that you're protecting yourselves and your team are doing the right things internally, right? That'll go a long way, and you don't want to be that supply chain attack that we're seeing out in the market. Recently, as recent as this year, actually. From a packaging perspective, so how do we get there? There's a lot of communication conversations out there, but effectively what I recommend to do is start with that baseline, right? This would be your stage one, and a lot of this would be dictated as whatever you're doing today in the market, right? So your stage one would include all of the security services out of the box that you're currently doing today. That allows you to go to market, start delivering across the board, and standardizing your operation and your sales piece as well. What that's going to allow you to do is give you time to then sort of build out your stage two or your standard package if you're looking at sort of, over time organically growing this into like a good, better type packaging. And this allows you to spend the next 6 to 12 months basically creating and adding those different components, those gaps that you see that you have in your stack today, and putting them into branching them out into an additional package, which you then look at upselling to your clients along the way. And then in the next 12 to 24 months, right, or 36 even, start to build out your stage 3. And this will allow you to fill out of those additional gaps that you haven't quite able to fit in that previous stage. So this is the organic way to grow it. And these are just examples of items you can use, right? This is not a line-by-line item of my recommendations. These are things that you would just build out organically. And if you try to do it all today, it will take you 12 to 24 months. So we need to get started today, because obviously threat actors aren't going to wait around. So when we look at what we need to prioritize and how we need to prioritize that, well, when I look at that, it's like, what would I use as sort of to dictate what we should be doing, right? So I use stats as part of this, and the most common stats out there, and there's multiple sources that you can get this from. I use this source here from Get Astra, who did basically a security audit and undertook across global and even Australia, New Zealand, and across Asia sort of statistics. So when we look at that, 80% of all breaches involve web browsers and mobile desktops, right? So there's an angle there that we can use. How do we sort of reduce that risk? When we look at 1.7 million ransomware attacks every day, right? There's a lot there. So we need to have something in place to sort of prevent against those or protect against those. Phishing is a sort of big thing as well. 1.2% of emails sent every day are malicious, which equates to about 3.4 billion phishing emails daily, right? So when we start to expand on these, right, there are all these different sort of statistics that we can leverage to make our decisions, right? Third-party breaches are the most common amongst publishers, right? So this is an indication of supply chain risks. This is where we need to do a better job of understanding the attack surface on our supply chain, on the vendors we use, and on the services we use as well. Right. So as I sort of break these down, this gets me to my priorities that I would generally recommend. I'm going to exclude the obvious, and those obvious things like MFA, local admin, adding EDR, backup firewalls, which we've already covered, and a lot of you are probably doing well today. If not, you're looking at expanding these out. If you're not doing these or haven't started doing these are probably the first bits I would recommend looking at. But beyond that, this is where I would recommend these items to start expanding into. And these items are introduce some sort of continuous vulnerability management or assessment solution or process. Security awareness training, because we want to change that culture. This leads to reduce the human element, right? One of those stats was 95% of all breaches, of all attacks, start with the human, right? They're affected by humans doing the wrong things, or adding the wrong configuration, or just making poor decisions across the board. So those are items we can sort of tick off. DNS, web filtering, email security, they sort of tick off those key areas where breaches occurred. Even expanding out to collaboration security, right? With the Team Fisher vulnerability recently on Microsoft Teams, that's where we want to start looking at that as well, because that's become open to potential vulnerabilities. And the lowest hanging fruit in my mind, but probably one of the difficult ones to set up, is your IAM, your identity and access management. This is just taking control and identifying, right, who should have access, why should I have access, and this sort of leads into things like SSO and stuff like that, right? If you're going to sort of adopt that strategy, that'll go a long way into sort of helping control and manage those users on who should have access and what data they should have access to. So start there. That hopefully there's a lot more you can do across that, but hopefully this gives you a way to prioritize. But again, those frameworks are designed to sort of help build this out. These are just my sort of thoughts and my opinions on how you can start sort of creating that. But effectively, it's about operations. Security is a process. It's not a particular product, right? So don't just try to throw a tool at it, right? Particularly with things like security awareness training. It's not going to work unless you have a proper plan in place to conduct it and doing that continuous improvement. So whatever you choose to implement and grab, and whatever vendors you're using as part of that, make sure that you have a process in place. Otherwise, it's all for naught. Okay, I've been talking for a bit. I'm now going to hand things over to Aidan to sort of talk about the Microsoft bit.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Elliot. There's some great info in there. We do have a couple of questions just in the chat if you want to get to them, if you can ping back, otherwise we'll get to those at the end as well. But yeah, thanks very much. Elliot has introduced some great security frameworks, concepts and services that you can start thinking about adding into your business. Basically, I'm just going to start having a look. What does this look like from a Microsoft perspective? How can you start utilizing some of the Microsoft licensing bundles in order to start navigating the complexity of cybersecurity, and how can you start making some inroads into progressing there? Sorry, I just went a bit too far. I don't think it'll come as a huge surprise that 85% of our partners currently see security as their biggest growth area. It was a surprise to me that it wasn't close to 100%, to be honest. But as we continue to see a large amount of security breaches, both in the high-profile cases, such as Medibank and Optus, in addition to just the number of cases that are coming into the SMB space, we can start to see why this is a huge priority. So going back to some of Elliot's earlier points around how do we expand beyond the basic antivirus, as that's no longer a sufficient baseline to navigate the threats today. But then also for yourselves as partners, how do you then start to deliver those services at scale, not bringing on any additional complexity as far as costs from headcount or processes internally? And then how do you restrict any of the other additional operation costs that may come with adding additional services and wanting to do more with less, basically to provide for your customers? So if we look to driving growth with Microsoft solutions for SMB, we start to think about how you can drive it through your own security and where you currently are on your journey. So a really good starting point we see is how do you establish yourself as the trusted advisor to your customers as a partner? So a great place to start is by auditing what's currently in place, making sure that you're maximizing the investments that you're currently making through your licensing and the services you have in play. We've seen a lot of patterns over the years of partners who actually haven't been turning on some of the licensing features that they've provided for their customers already, if they are utilizing things like business premium or higher bundles within the Microsoft ecosystem. But it's basically just making sure you get the most on your investment at the start, because ultimately, if you're not having those proactive conversations with your customers about their security journey, chances are, at best case scenario, they might be doing the research by themselves, or even worse, they may be having that conversation with someone else. So you want to make sure that they're seeing you as that trusted advisor and that leader in the security space for them. One of the opportunities that then comes out of that conversation is how can you then accelerate an upsell conversation looking to benefit yourself both commercially and then also the coverage that you have for those customers. So thinking if your customers currently have business basic or business standard or even just an exchange online license, how can then you start looking at the value that's coming through the business premium stack, which is starting to see as Microsoft's hero product for the SMB, and how can you align that to sort of the frameworks that Elliot's discussed that you can align to there, and how can you drive up the value stack from there as well. So as we have looked at, if you've chosen a framework and one that you want to utilize and move upon from there, you want to start integrating this into your sales and marketing messaging as well. So not only providing that internally, but how can you use that as a weapon that you can then take out to the open market to keep growing your business, to keep making sure that the investments you've made internally to provide for your security stack are going to keep benefiting you in the future. And then that's how do you then create that into a roadmap? So thinking about what's the starting point for you today, choose the maturity level that's appropriate for you, but then how do you want to keep adding to those services, keep becoming more of the expert within this space and making sure that you're adding more and more as you go on sustainably. So a great example to get started on this is just utilizing a classic SWOT analysis. What are your strengths, weaknesses? What are the opportunities and what are the threats to your business? Having a really nice conversation internally, and then it can give you a nice opportunity to how you can work with the team here at Pax8 to find the right resources to be successful in future as well. So if we then look at the how to increase the profitability and the customer lifetime value through a security lens, similar to what Elliot brought up earlier around some of the stacks that you can start rolling out, we're then looking at the good, better, best kind of model. So today, just as it is a 101 session, we started looking mostly at the good stack. So how can you make sure SSO is switched on, how much you're taking advantage of MFA, you're looking after the business continuity and disaster recovery requirements, which can largely be provided through the business premium stack. We can then look further up the stack and you get more advanced, starting to integrate the infrastructure of your clients in there as well. How can then you have proactive managed services as part of this? And then some of the acronyms that you'd be familiar of that Elliot mentioned, how can you start looking at things like XDR? So you're increasing the profitability and services that you can provide to your customer. And then as you're becoming more proficient and more build up that expertise around security, you're getting more value out of your customers and they're ultimately getting more value through you over time as well. So less likely to churn. So if we're thinking about a lot of the concepts that Elliot's spoken about, a lot of the frameworks about where the market's going and how to grow your business, why would we then start to look at something like Business Premium as a starting point to build out that baseline for you? So a really good starting point is then to look at some of the security defaults that you can drive here. So initially looking at the headlines, providing for your customers to collaborate in real time, sort of those classic digital transformation discussions that would have come out throughout the COVID period with a lot of your customers who didn't jump on the bandwagon early on. But this is to make sure they can take full advantage of the M365 suite of apps. But then that'll in turn creates an opportunity to make sure that they've got a solid baseline of security protection to allow for that productivity benefit off the back end. This is something that we're going to see increase as a requirement as sort of the Copilot and AI engines within Microsoft start to pick up in the new year as well. So you do need to have that healthy security default across protecting identity, across protecting data and devices and apps as well to make sure that when they're ready for that growth, they can do that sustainably and safely as well. Sorry about that. So if we have a look at a little bit of a deeper layer when it's coming through to the M365 Business Premium Suite, we can then start to see a lot of the concepts and cut through the noise of what Elliot was mentioning before, aligning to the core pillars of identity security, device security, apps, and documents. So within Business Premium, you're able to then provide for more efficient processes around like providing your customers self-service password resets, which will really start to cut down on tickets. And then also things like conditional access, single sign-on, MFA, all of those ones that are really going to provide the largest chunk of protection to your users, but also providing a larger way to prevent the operational cost of your business to deliver those. Then through the Intune suite, you're starting to control all of the devices and applications and how they're performing on your customer's network and within their environment. So giving a really good snapshot as to who's in there, who isn't in there, and making sure you can take the required action for when a scenario does pop up. But then also for the document security, how can you make sure that if someone is in your network on the right device or using the right application, how does the right user have the sufficient access to make sure that the information is ultimately protected, and you have policies in place if someone tries to take that outside of the corporate environment or trying to do something that take an action basically that you want to protect against as well. So if we try and simplify a lot of what we've spoken about here, not only from a security concept, but also from the Microsoft lens, we can then see that there's 8 new security defaults that you can start talking to your customers to really break down the conversation and see and align that to the value that you want to drive for them as well. So these being conditional access, MFA, single sign-on, device management, email security, encryption, data loss prevention, and endpoint security. So sorry for listing all of those, but basically just wanted to start highlighting these because what these do is they align to a lot of the add-ons that you can get within either the Microsoft ecosystem or aligning to products that you may be providing through a third-party vendor as well. So what this wants to do is by looking through a Business Premium lens is how can you consolidate this portion of your security baseline to then see what solutions do you need to fill in the gaps outside of this, but also reduce down the costs and the operational requirement to deliver these. So I'll go through to the next slide, which shows a bit more of a breakdown of these costs. But through Business Premium, it's actually $29 worth of add-ons to provide these 8 defaults. And if we go through to the next slide, we can see where those costs start to break down and how they start to align to some of the suites that are available through Microsoft. So as you can see, basically the take-home message here is you're getting $29 worth of add-ons to drive those 8 security defaults. You can talk to your customers on each one of those and the requirements of why they need these in regards to your security frameworks. But then even if they're on a business basic license at the moment or business standard, you get to create a really compelling case from there as to why Business Premium starts to make a bit more sense. Obviously 20 plus 29 gets a lot higher than $36, for example. And you get to show, in addition to this, Microsoft is providing more services into the Business Premium bundle. Say, for example, the recent addition of Defender for Business, which then starts bringing in things like endpoint security. And they are going to be looking to add new services in there as it is the lead SMB SKU for them as well. But ultimately, a lot of the people on the webinar today may have been working with Microsoft for quite a few years, and they may not see them particularly as a security-focused vendor. So if you're not familiar with Microsoft as a security vendor, why would we want to trust them? May have gone a little bit too far. Sorry, mate. I'll just continue on from there. But what we have is Microsoft as a security vendor. It's grown about 50% year on year, the size of their Microsoft business. They've been investing billions and billions in research and development. And in the most recent fiscal year, it actually was over $20 billion. So this is a key play for them, and it's something that they're going to continue investing in. The slide that we just missed out, but we'll send through the slides after this. They're actually in the leader position for 5 Gartner Magic Quadrants. So we've got them across the endpoint protection and identity and a few other key ones, but they're also a leader in the 9 Forrester Wave reports as well. So it's really helpful when you're bringing these to the table to your customers to show how much of a leader Microsoft is in that space, in addition to the costs that are able to be consolidated within the business premium stack as well. So as you're building your sales and your marketing messaging that's going to your customers, you're able to not only show why the solution is going to be more valuable to them, why the commercial outcome is more efficient, but then also within your business, how you can deliver this at scale and reduce down the noise of how many different vendors and management portals and training courses you need to navigate in order to deliver these. So I wanted to just have a quick look is if you're doing a lot of the effort, you're going through all of the security concepts, you're investing that within your business, you're doing a lot of the training, and you're ultimately delivering to the customers. What is the commercial incentive for you? Or if you're going to be a Microsoft Cloud partner solutions designated partner, what do the incentives look like for you there as well? So first, an example that I just wanted to show, if you are a solutions designated partner, or if you're currently a silver and gold partner and still receiving your incentives there, you do start to receive core and accelerated incentives off the back of the margin that you generate here. So the example that I've used today is if you're an MSP that's currently got 500 business standard seats with 12% margin on RRP, just using that as an example, but you can insert your discount there. You're currently looking at about 10K worth of revenue and about $1,200 worth of margin. If you then become a solutions designation partner and start to receive your incentives there, you get an additional 4%. So what this means is on top of your $1,200 worth of revenue, it then goes up to $1,600 in margins and incentives. But if you move to a business premium suite, so you go through that upsell motion that we've been discussing, off the larger revenue pool that you have available, so you've got $18,000 worth of revenue, you actually see a 207% margin increase, which takes you from $1,600 in margin up to $3,800 for there. So there is a lot of an incentive to go up the process and get that increased margin from Microsoft, in addition to some of the benefits that you're hopefully going to see from an operational perspective and from a security implementation perspective as well, for the value that you're going to be driving to your customers. So I'm just trying to go to the next slide. Awesome. So I've kind of covered a bit of ground and understand that there's been a lot of content coming through from Elliot around a lot of the concepts and frameworks today, but there are a lot of resources for partners. I understand one of the big pain points for Microsoft partners is that there's too much content out there, and how do you make sure that you focus in the right direction? I've tried to consolidate this down into some of the material that I've found most helpful to cut through the noise and really help progress not only your technical, but your sales and marketing efforts when it comes to Microsoft. They do align a lot of this content now to frameworks, so Essential 8 guidelines, and there are some really good content around aligning to SIS controls as well. But one of the sort of unsung heroes that we're going to see a lot of progress for, and it has had a mixed history, but M365 Lighthouse in ways you can navigate multi-tenancy management for Microsoft 365. We've been having a few chats with the Microsoft team on their progress here, so look for a lot of announcements at Inspire next week. But it is ultimately going to be a way to help navigate a lot of the features that we've been talking about today at scale, so reducing down that operational cost to implement them as well. So I think that's it from me on the Microsoft side. I saw a few questions flying through there, Elliot, but do you want to close us out with the final slides there, and I'll start answering those?
Yeah, thanks, Aidan. Great job. All right, to finish things up for the last couple of minutes. So where do you get started? How can Pax8 help you? Well, as many of you have probably seen where you registered for today's session, the Security Learning Center that we've just launched has a lot of content in there, has a lot of videos, training materials, collateral that you can start to leverage out of the box. That is the QR code to get to it. Again, this can be available after the session or on recording, so feel free to go through and leverage that and ask any questions along the way. We've also got our Pax8 Academy, and this is a big part of what we do over here at Pax8, is basically around education, right? Every step of the way. And we've got education beyond cybersecurity through operations control, sales and marketing, and a bunch of other stuff. So that is a mix of things like on demand through our university or LMS, right? That you can sort of leverage out of the box and online. We've also got instructor-led courses available to you where, it's a small group. We take you through those particular specific topics. We got one-to-one coaching through our, several coaches that we have on staff. Again, they have the different sort of criteria and their experience that you can leverage. And we're also launching our peer groups, will allow you to basically collaborate with your peers and other MSPs around the world. Some of the upcoming security courses are things like applying a security framework. So much to what we're talking about today, heavy focus around CIS controls, but we're going to tap into some of the other ones as well. Unfortunately, that one is sold out for, or it's full for this particular date, and that starts in the 19th of July. We will be running them every quarter, though. So if you're interested in that, have a chat to your CAM, and we can look at adding you to the next class. Things like developing security policies. We're going to do that bi-yearly. That's a 2-day sort of course. That's going to be launched in August. There's still plenty of room there if you wish to sort of build that out. And things like hardening Microsoft 365 security. So using Business Premium, much like to what Aidan sort of covered off, expanding on that and sort of give you sort of technical background on how to actually implement it across yourselves and your client environments. Two other things that's currently in development that we're working on is things like positioning and selling security, because a lot of partners I speak to generally have a hard time around this particular perspective. So things like, how to sort of go to market, build out your package, but also handle objections and how to sort of speak to clients in a way where you're not introducing things like FUD, fear, uncertainty, doubt into those conversations, but leading with awareness. Right, and things like developing an incident response plan as well as something in development. I think a lot of partners sort of need help in that regard. So we're looking forward to sort of building out that content for you. On top of that, we do have consultations available through myself, Aidan, and the wider team. If you are looking at sort of expanding out on some of the concepts you learned today, or just wanting to have a chat and sort of go into a bit more detail, reach out to your CAM, let them know that you want to set up a session with either of us, and we'll be more than happy to spend some time with you and help you grow your business. Again, whether you're starting your journey or sort of expanding on what you've already done as part of that. Right. To answer one of the questions that was in the chat, right, there is more than Microsoft. There is a plethora of other vendors on the line card. We're up to, I think, 32 vendors today that are live and generally available in our Pax8 catalog. 22 of these, including some of the ones that are coming soon, are security focused, right? So that's almost 65 to 70% of our vendors. And we're constantly adding more vendors. I think there's another 15 to 20 vendors before the end of the year, and a vast majority of them are focused in the security space. So we take that seriously. We want to make sure that we're supporting you. But again, a lot of that is really not just throwing a tool. We want to make sure that you've got the processes right, your incident response plans, and make sure the operations team is doing the right thing as well. So we don't have time for questions, but in parting, I want to leave you with this. When we look at cybersecurity, true cybersecurity is preparing for what's next, right? While we won't always know what's next, we can sort of take, what we're doing in place, our security hygiene, putting these best practices to help reduce our risk and add those preventative measures in place so that we can prevent against the new and greater threats out there. But making sure that they keep up to it, because it's not just about focusing on the last one, while we still need to. We want to make sure that you're protecting your clients and yourselves in the long term. Right? That was a lot of content today. Thank you for being patient and spending some time with us. Thank you, Aidan, again for joining. If you have any questions, the recording will be available after this. We'll also share slides to anyone who wants a copy of it. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us and your CAMs. And we'll help you in any way we can. Thanks again. Appreciate your time.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.